Hello, and welcome to the Mindful Coping Podcast, Amplifying Voices, where I feature various voices in the mental health community to create safe spaces of dialogue and growth. I'm Rhys Moon, a 16-year-old teenager from Southern California who was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome and OCD, and I founded Mindful Coping, a platform dedicated to providing free and accessible resources to teens with mental illness. You can check out my content on my Instagram at Mindful Coping and website mindfulcoping.net. I'm so thankful to be joined here today with Dr. Jimenez, a therapist, author, speaker, activist, and more. And without further ado, Dr. Jimenez, please introduce yourself.
Welcome. So my name is Dr. Jimenez. I am a clinical psychologist, but I have to give a short disclaimer due to my profession before we get started. So all the views expressed today are my own and do not represent the opinions of any entity whatsoever for which I have been and now will be affiliated. Also, the information provided for me here is for educational purposes only. So please consult your healthcare provider or for specific health advice. So thank you. So now that I got that out of the way, it's a disclaimer I have to give because of my profession. So a little bit about myself. My name is Dr. Jimenez. So I was born in the Dominican Republic and also have lived in Puerto Rico and Philadelphia. Now I am a clinician for the past 10 years and I specialize in anxiety disorders, PTSD, as well as wellness and holistic health. I'm also an Afro-Latina bilingual psychologist, and I also specialize in holistic modalities. So I'm also interested in how mental health impact marginalized communities and Black, Indigenous, and people of color. I know that there are some barriers within our community. So, and also I do work a lot with individuals that have had sexual trauma and other difficulties. And so that's a little bit about me. Also, I have worked in the US, Latin America, and in India. And yeah, so those are some of the things about myself.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. My next question is, how have you personally been managing your mental health during this quarantine?
Yes, so although I'm a healthcare provider, my philosophy is that I practice, right, what I preach. Because again, unfortunately, in the healthcare industry, there's a lot of burnout. So even prior to the pandemic, I'm very into wellness and lifestyle medicine. So what I've been doing that has been very helpful for me to maintain my mental health has been knowing my needs. The first thing that we need to know is what is my mind and body telling me, right? And what are some of the things that I need to do to better that? So in my case, since I work a lot, I've been resting, right? Knowing my boundaries, eating plant-based foods, making sure that what I eat is healthy, because we do know also the impact that food has on our mental health and our physical health as well. So in order to increase my immunity and have a balanced mental health, I make sure that I eat a lot of fruits and veggies and nuts. Also, I've been meditating a lot. Meditation is one of the things that has helped me throughout my life. I will say, yes, I have dealt with anxiety in the past, and meditation and breathing and just stopping for 5 minutes has been something beneficial. Also, staying physically active. I know that we're locked in. A lot of people are like students are doing online schooling, but we need to stay physically active because I noticed how that was kind of slugging me down. So I've been trying to just, stand during sessions, walk around the block a little bit. I just bought a treadmill, but also because physical activity is really good for our mental health. Why? In moderation, right? Everything in moderation. Because when we exercise, we release serotonin, dopamine, and those are the chemicals that help the brain kind of relax and be in an optimal health. Also connecting with loved ones. I know that a lot of people are struggling because they're not able to socialize. So I've been finding creative ways to stay. I don't want to say social distancing. I like to say physical distancing, right? We don't want to be all up on each other, but we don't want to be socially distancing because as human beings, we're social beings. So what I've been doing is my family might be in the Caribbean or the East Coast or all over. So I do Zoom meetings with them. I also make sure that I have joined communities or follow people on Instagram that are aligned with my views. So it kind of to stay socially connected and meet up with friends locally, not large groups, that maybe one friend or two, we might go on a walk or a hike to just kind of be able to connect. And also taking social media breaks or media, right?
Yes.
It's been a 2020 and 21. There's been a lot. So I know as a person of color, right, we had the protests, we have had a lot of things. So sometimes we don't need to watch those videos. We don't need to watch another cop killing, because that's going to be distressful to us and gives us more anxiety. So I purposely use social media to empower myself. And I know, like, following pages like yours, right, that are beneficial,
Thank you.
but then logging off when I know that, there's too much news that could trigger me. So those are the things that I've been doing to kind of like maintain my mental health during quarantine.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I'm sure that, with a lot of the chaos that has been going on recently and, the police brutality, it was such a tumultuous, difficult time. So I definitely agree with, logging off. And I love that phrase of, physical distancing, not social distancing, because
Hey.
we're social creatures.
Yeah.
My next question is, do you have any specific tips you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, so some of the things that I would like to share, I know that your audience, a lot are dealing with tics and OCD and anxiety disorders. One of the biggest recommendation would be to just simply stop, right? Like when you notice that anxiety coming up, stopping, taking some deep breath, right? Inhaling for 4, exhaling for 4, and then thinking, right? After you breathe and stop, is what is my thought, right? What are the thoughts that I'm having right now? What is my emotions that are coming up right now? And where do I feel that in my body? Oh, I'm noticing that my face is twitching, or I'm noticing that my breathing is short. Let me then and then ask yourself, right? You can ask, is that, if you're having an intrusive thought, like, is that thought realistic or helpful, right? For example, let's say that there's a thought that I'm not good enough. Then you can ask yourself, like, is that thought realistic? No, it's not realistic, because you look at all these things I'm doing, or you know what, that thought is not helpful. Then proceeding to do something that's aligned with your values. Like, you know what, I'm still going to do that interview. I'm still going to go and go for a walk, even though it's going to be by myself because I need some sunlight. So I call that the STOP acronym. So if you write STOP, S is for stopping, because we need to pause the trigger of the anxiety. Then T is to take deep breaths. The reason why we need to take deep breath is because when we breathe, we activate the frontal cortex, which is higher thinking. When we're anxious or stressed, we are activating the primitive part of the brain that is the fight or flight response, right? So we don't want to, if there's a crisis, that's the perfect area. But when we are having day-to-day interactions, we want to be aligned with our higher thinking. So that's why we need to breathe in order, and also to send oxygen to the brain. So T is for taking breath. Then O is observe your thoughts, your emotions, and your body. Notice it with love and compassion. We don't want to judge it. We just simply want to label. Oh, I'm having a thought that of not feeling safe, or I'm having a thought of embarrassment. That's okay. It's just a thought. We want to label it, but without judgment. And then we want to ask ourselves, if we cannot let go of the thought, is it helpful or realistic? And finally, the P is to proceed to do something that's aligned with your value, right? It might be, you know what, although I'm anxious, I'm still going to go and ride my bicycle, right? Although I'm anxious, I'm going to finish this schoolwork, because you know what, I do want to finish my education because it's important to me, right? So that is something that I will recommend.
Incredible.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I really love that acronym of STOP, because I sort of think that, oh, just take a deep breath or whatever is very cliche, but putting that, actually thinking about hey, taking a deep breath has these consequences, like you said, activating the frontal cortex. I
Yeah.
think understanding, a lot of the deeper connections is so important because instead of just, oh, take a deep breath, but take a deep breath and understand how that's helping you.
Yeah, and noticing what's happening within, right?
Hmm.
Because right now we live in a society, right? There's a lot of stimulation, right? Unfortunately, we're like connected. Although technology is great, we're plugged in now,
Hmm.
24, almost 24/7. And the thing is that there's a lot of stimulation. And if we have anxiety, all that stimulation can be problematic if we don't stop to notice what's my thought, what are my feelings, and what are my needs. That was something I was going to say also as a tip, to stop and take at least 5 minutes a day to just breathe or journaling, because we need to release what's happening with inside. Also, it's
Hmm.
important to identify what are our needs, not our wants, right? We have a lot of wants, but
Hmm.
what are our needs? Like, for example, sometimes I remember during the lockdown, I have been locked in my house for like 3 weeks doing therapy and seeing
Yeah.
people, social interactions. And I caught myself about to have almost a panic attack. I'm like, what? Me, a panic attack? But I
Hmm.
was able to identify, breathe through it, do the stop acronym, and see, oh, wow, the need that my mind and body needs, it needs to go outside, it needs to breathe, right? So then I
Hmm.
literally just started taking small walks around my neighborhood,
Hmm.
or at least during lunch, go to the balcony and take some
Yeah.
sun. And that was all. That was basically, my symptoms are not bad. It's simply like, what is my mind and body trying to tell me?
Hmm.
It was
Hmm.
trying to tell me, girl, go outside and breathe and get some sun.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. My next question is, what specific areas of mental health interest or concern you the most?
Okay. So the specific area that interested me the most are
Hmm.
anxiety,
Mm.
trauma, and PTSD. Like, that's really my specialty. And
Hmm.
generational trauma, and particularly how generational trauma has impacted individuals of color or marginalized
Hmm.
groups.
Hmm.
Also, I love to work with individuals that deal with sexual trauma. As you see, I'm big into wellness and women's
Hmm.
health, and also diversity, intersectionality. Another
Mm.
big area is holistic modalities beyond Western medicine, right? There's a lot of power into our Afro-Indigenous cultures that
Hmm.
we don't look, and also Eastern culture. That's where
Mm.
mindfulness comes from.
Hmm.
So I like the mind-body connection. And
Hmm.
basically the motto I follow, it's how our biology, our psychology, basically our temperament and society impacts us, and how we
Hmm.
can intervene in order to bring about wellness. And
Hmm.
also how food, right, our environment
Hmm.
impacts our health, and what can we do to empower. The reason why I call my page Dr. J Empowers is, how can we empower ourselves, right?
Hmm.
And find tools and healings that is more aligned with our lifestyle, right? Because we're all different.
Yeah, yeah. Incredible. I really like that, holistic approach to so many different things like
Yeah,
biology, psychology, society, because it's not just like one thing in a straight line, but a web of all things that change and affect each other.
exactly. Yeah. And sometimes, the Western medicine is great, but we also need to integrate some of those holistic modalities. Like, okay, let's address the root of the problem and
Hmm.
intervene in a way that is long term, not
For sure.
temporary. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. My next question goes along those lines. What has your journey of mental health awareness and wellness been?
Okay, so my journey is, again, it's very rooted in what I have been noting. So I was born in the Dominican Republic, which is in the Caribbean. I
Hmm.
also, as a young girl, I moved to Puerto Rico, New York City, Philly. So as you can see, I lived and moved a lot. So for me, being from the Caribbean, mental health is very taboo, which is now it's getting better, right? But
Hmm.
when it comes to being from an island, or for BIPOC communities,
Hmm.
saying that you're anxious or depressed is taboo. So I will see how individuals that had severe mental illness like schizophrenia or bipolar, oftentimes were just put at a hospital and they had no quality of life. I also saw how a lot of the times in families, right, there's a lot of family secrets, right? Being from the Caribbean, we're known, right, for being the beach, being happy, reggae, dancing. But there's also a lot of suffering that it's not shown to people, right? And we suffer in silence. So then when I moved to the United States and I understood what a psychologist was, I was like, wow, so these individuals help us cope with these things that it's invisible, right? And so that's why I started loving psychology. And then in college, I took a yoga. I just wanted 3 easy college credits. So I took yoga, but it transformed my life. So that's where yoga, the principles of yoga, studying like the philosophy was very healing to me. And I also admire Buddhism. In high school, I was a history nerd. So I love Buddhism. So then I started transforming within. I started realizing, the power of the mind, and also of how a lot of the suffering comes from within, and also due to generational patterns. And so I started really going in through that journey. And then as I got deeper into psychology, I learned about neuroplasticity. Basically, that means that the brain can rebuild itself. So although we had trauma, although we might have mental illness, we can rebuild we have the power of healing, but of course we have to do that work. So it became even more important for me to follow that path. So that was my path of coming from, the mental health taboo and let's keep it a secret, to like, no, like, let's own it and let's work at it and let's help each other. And it's okay that's happening. We have the tools.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I want to just add that specifically in the Asian American community as well, there's a huge stigma surrounding mental health, and especially that communication, because especially in my Korean culture, it especially values, social hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
So like, for example, elders have the say over the young people. So it's difficult sometimes for people like me in a Korean community or East Asian culture to feel like they have, a voice that can be heard and it matters. But I think that, thankfully we're moving towards that and stigma is reducing. And I've benefited a lot from Korean Eastern medicine as well. Things like acupuncture or like cupping therapy have helped me loosen my muscles. So there's definitely huge value in that.
Yeah. So it's kind of like how we need people like us, right? To kind of like shift our cultural norms, right?
Yes.
And embracing the positives, right? Of those modalities you mentioned from your Korean culture, and also integrating some of the things from the West. So that's really beautiful of how,
Yes.
taking our ancestral knowledge and also validating it and removing that stigma.
I completely agree. My next question is, what was the inciting incident in your life that made you want to start promoting mental health?
So like I noted earlier, the exciting incident for me was basically living in the Caribbean, like particular Dominican Republic. So there's a lot of poverty, right? There's extremes. You have people that are extremely wealthy and people that are extremely rich. And I remember being like 6 years old and passing by a psychiatric hospital. The way that they look in then, this is many years ago, over 30 years ago. It's kind of like the old school hospitals that we see from the 60s and 70s in the movies, right? So I would see people in white robes and they will be walking around and they just looked unhappy. Or if there was somebody that had severe mental illness, the family would just keep them, in the house locked in, but they will provide, but they didn't have quality of life. So as a young girl seeing that, that was heartbreaking to me. And I just, back then it was just like, there was nothing, there was no treatment. So for me, I felt like, no, that there should be more. So it kind of, when I moved to the US and I saw that what, guidance counselors were, that also impacted me. Also dealing with generational trauma and colonization and racism,
Yeah.
and understanding how that works. And like, I'm Afro-Latina, meaning like I have indigenous roots and African as well as European. So seeing how my ancestors dealt with trauma and how some of that trauma is still being enacted by us right now. So I was like, how can we liberate our minds? So I really, those were the things, basically, like growing up in a marginalized island that has dealt with colonization and then dealing with racism myself kind of motivated me to like, how can I promote wellness so we can, rise as as humans, right?
Yeah, for sure. I could definitely share some of my family's experiences dealing with colonialism and the impacts of it because, Korea was colonized by Japan, and my grandparents have suffered a lot of that, generational trauma coming from the atrocities that were presented there, as with a lot of, I could sense with a whole bunch of European colonialism as well, and the
Yeah.
long-lasting effects on those cultures.
Yeah, and some of that is still passed on, right? That's why there's such a stigma in our community to seek mental health, right? Because
Yeah.
like, no, we need to appear like we're put together. We got this, but it's okay to be resilient, but it's also okay to ask for help, regardless of what our race or gender, sexuality is. It's just knowing, you know what, and who can I trust, right? Making sure that we find providers or therapies that are aligned with our worldview as well.
Of course. My next question is slightly more personal.
Yeah.
What are the struggles that you've been going through right now? And if it's too personal, please feel free to keep it vague. But, sort of the things that have appeared because of the pandemic or other notable incidents.
Yeah, so like I noted earlier, right, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was really difficult shifting from a clinical setting to working from home. And at first it was kind of isolating, kind of, as a psychologist, you're dealing with everybody's difficulties plus your own. And then one of the positive things of having to interact and go into the office was socializing, right? With coworkers and debriefing and talking about cases. So at the beginning that was hard, but I quickly realized like, okay, how can I find creative ways to still stay in touch? It might have been like talking to coworkers or going for coffee or doing a Zoom meeting. So I was able to overcome that. Another one is maybe dealing with life transition now that it's like starting a family, right? In the context of everything that's happening with this pandemic and globally. It's like, it's kind of like, do I start it now? Do I pause
Yeah.
it? What do I do? So that's some of the things that I have dealt with, but what I'm doing is basically like just stopping and breathing and saying, okay, how can I focus on today, right? We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We can learn from the past, but what is it that I need today, right? And
Yeah.
as we take it day by day, we're able addressing our needs, we're able to overcome in whichever way we can. It's not going to be perfect, right? Many of us have plans, right, for last year or even this year. It may not go like we want to, but how can we still honor our values and the things
Yeah.
that we want to do?
I completely agree with that. And I really like how you emphasize, the day by day approach, because I feel like as a teenager, it's easy for me to get overwhelmed with school, with friends, social media, also worrying about things like college, education, and competing with others. But then, if I really think, what do I need to do for me today to make this something good for me is so much more important.
Yeah, and that was the biggest thing. Like when I was 16, that's exactly how I thought. And my heart goes out to everyone that's a teenager or a young adult or a child going through this 2020 and everything that's happening, because it's difficult. My heart goes out to you all. And something I keep, the biggest advice that if I could give advice to my 16-year-old self, it would be that, like, what is it that you need to do today for yourself and for your, the goals that you have. But, like, it's the day by day. That's how I got through graduate school. That's how I made it. And that's why Buddhism and mindfulness and like even my own Afro-Indigenous spirituality was helpful, because the Western world and even in some Asian cultures, right, there's a lot of competition and achievement, but we can't get there if we burn out psychologically and physically. So what literally helped me deal with all of it was mindfulness, right? Like stopping, breathing, and noticing what I need now, right? And when I was in college, I'm like, okay, I don't need to worry about that I need to write a dissertation and pass all these. Today, I literally need to read 20 pages on my syllabus. I need to write a 2-page paper. And then after I do that, how can I reward myself? Okay, I'm going to go out for a run. I'm going to go out with friends, or I'm going to sleep in. So I always rewarded myself. And I also realized that it was better for me to be healthy and grounded than to have an A, right?
Yes.
Nobody's, that's a big secret. After, nobody is going to look at the GPA. Yes, achievement is important, but our health is even more important than that. So I not compete. I saw my competition was myself. Who I was, how can I be better than what I was yesterday? But also realizing that I'm a human being and that I need breaks because I'm not.
For sure. So that leads great into our next question. What steps are you taking to put you on the path to mental wellness?
Yeah, so like I noted earlier, right? Like I practice what I promote. And also one of the biggest things is setting boundaries, right? This is something I don't know if I talked a lot, but it's making sure that we set personal boundaries. I'm a helper and I love help. That's why I'm a psychologist, right? But I have to realize that I can't do it all, right? That I am not superwoman, that I need to sleep, that I need to leave work on time, that I need to take care of myself, and also setting boundaries. Something also important, gratitude, taking time to journal and get out what I'm feeling within and listing what I'm grateful for. So they done research that if you just keep a gratitude journal for 21 days, it changes and rewires the brain. The same thing with meditation. So I've been, although there's a lot happening, I'm like, okay, what am I grateful for? What are 3 things that I'm grateful for? And I have kept up with my mind and body soul practices, such as meditation, plant-based eating, physical activity, and knowing my limits. So if I had to break it down, it's basically gratitude, knowing what are my needs and what are some boundaries that I need to place, including with my family and friends, because sometimes they might mean well, but our needs are different.
Yeah, I really agree with you. And a lot of that comes through, communication, but that takes time and hard work as well.
Yeah. And now that you mentioned communication, and I'm glad you brought it up, that's important. So when it comes to communication, something that I tell people is before I say something, I ask myself, what I'm about to say, is it true? Is it necessary? And is it kind? And if it is, then I say it. So sometimes it may not be kind, right? Because we're not perfect. So then I take a day or two and then I say, how can I say this in a more compassionate way? And then I say it.
For sure. My next question is, what resources, especially free and accessible ones, would you share with our audience and our readers?
Yeah, so I would recommend my page. So it's Dr. J _empowers. Also there, I love the app Insight Timer. I'm not sure if you know about it, but it has I'm not promoting them. I'm not promoting nothing. It's just tools that I have utilized that are not getting paid by none of these individuals. It's just resources that have been helpful to me. So Insight Timer is an app that has over 44,000 meditations. So you can, any topic that you can think of, they have a meditation for it. They also have talks. And most of it's a free platform. Also, something that I recommend, Ladder app is an app that is for people of color and marginalized communities, utilizing voices that look like them. So that's also another meditation platform. Um, Also, something that I found helpful was following hashtags on Instagram that are aligned with
Yeah.
what I want to improve. So, for example, I remember there was a period where I was really interested in burnout, and I just followed the hashtag burnout, burnout prevention. So, let's say you have a tic disorder, following the hashtags, because you will find information of people posting that. Also, a book that I love because it's very integrative. It's called The Urban Monk. And it talks about basically how can we live within this society but have some balance. So that is one that I really enjoy. And finally, there's a website called I as in igloo, M as in Mary, C as in cat, W.org. It has also meditations and talks about various topics. And another one is nutritionfacts.org, which has a lot of information about lifestyle and eating. And I can provide you with all of this information so you can share it with your reader.
Perfect. Yeah, I will. I've written down all those links and I'll definitely put them in the description in the post because I
Perfect.
think it's so important that, anyone who wants access to these materials can get it.
So
For sure. My next question is more lighthearted. Tell us
yeah.
3 fun facts about yourself.
Okay, so I am a certified yoga teacher, which I always wanted to become a yoga teacher, and that's also the pandemic has brought blessings as well, right?
Yeah.
Due to my busy work schedule, sometimes it would have been hard for me to go off for a month retreat, right? I don't have the time for it, but I was able to become a certified yoga teacher, which is
Wow.
something that I started working on over 15 years ago. Also, as somebody that dealt with anxiety before, exploring the world was something I always wanted to do. And when the world was open back in the day, like, oh, friends don't want to go, but I went to India for 2 months by myself as a woman, which is, really testing
Yeah.
my anxiety.
Uh-huh.
And I lived in a Buddhist monastery. It was an amazing experience, and that's where I learned a lot of mindfulness and Buddhist psychology.
Wow.
And
Uh-huh.
also, I love comedy. I love to laugh. I feel like laughter is one of the best medicines. So even when I'm like not in the best of moods, I might put a stand-up comedy as I do dishes. And I love meme therapy. I call it meme therapy. We're just sitting there looking at memes and laughing. So those are 3 things that I
For
really
sure.
enjoy.
Perfect. Perfect. My next question is, what are the 3 main takeaway points that you'd like to share with our audience and the readers?
Yeah, so my 3 main points, and it might be more than one, but
Mm-hmm.
it's really to take the time to really stop and know yourself and your needs. You can do this via meditation, journaling, or simply breathing and noticing what comes up for you. But really do stop and assess what's happening within you. Also, to identify the things that you are grateful for. Like, I'm grateful for these things. Also, to seek support, that it's okay to seek support, and particularly mental health. Why? Because we all have struggle. We are humans, and it's okay to seek support, and also to listen to the messages of your mind and your body.
Yeah.
And finally, self accountability, right? If my body is telling me that I'm anxious or that it's too much, right? To have the accountability to do something about it, right? And to take the steps. And finally, to research, question, and identify what's necessary for you to improve yourself. How do we take back ownership of ourselves as opposed to, thinking like somebody else is an expert? No, you're the expert of your own
Yeah.
health. You just seek somebody that can guide you through this journey.
Yeah, I completely agree. My last question for today's podcast already, I know the time flew by,
I
is
know.
what would you like to promote and how can we find out more information about you?
Okay, so I would like to promote my Instagram page. It's
Mm-hmm.
Dr. J underscore empowers. I started that page, right? It's not for psychological purposes, more for educational. I started it during the pandemic because I noticed how mental health, unfortunately, was worsening during the pandemic, and it had been
Mm-hmm.
worsening for a while, and especially for individuals that don't have access, right? Not everybody has the access to go to a psychologist or has health
Mm-hmm.
care, and also in particularly marginalized communities. So one of the biggest barriers for mental health is getting the help. So that's
Yeah.
why I created that platform to kind of offer education that is free and available. So, so people can empower themselves to better themselves.
I completely agree with that. And I'll put your Instagram and all of the links that you've mentioned today in the description below of our podcast. I just wanted to say thank you so much one more time, Dr. Jimenez, for coming and sharing your incredible expertise and your story. I've learned so much just by talking with you and learning about incredible things. I particularly like the STOP acronym and really understanding the mind body connections and also being able to connect, our society with our health and our physicality and nutrition and social issues. And I really like how you approach all of these with, an open mind and also holistic approaches. So thank you so much for sharing all of your
No
expertise
problem.
today.
And can I ask you a question also?
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
so as a provider, what are some of the things that you kind of will wish from us that are in the mental health field?
For that's a really, really, great question. And I think that by doing things like telemedicine, I've learned
Hmm.
that it's easy for us to feel disengaged.
Hmm.
And I think that, always having therapists and medical professionals be the one to reach out and say, um, what is going on in your life, because I feel like it's different from a setting that's online versus in person, and in person feels so much more
Hmm.
personal and one to one, but I think that the computer screen can be sort of a barrier to that. So I think taking strides to make therapy sessions more comfortable, more safe, and
Hmm.
inclusive as well is super important.
Perfect, perfect. So
Thank you
that is
so much.
a great feedback, because a lot of the times, right, it's also important for us to get feedback. So you're saying to make more telemedicine more accessible and to reach out and see what's happening and make it more
Yeah,
comfortable.
for
Definitely.
sure. Thank you so much.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Isn't it funny? We came to that. I thought I won you over, but you were holding back. Isn't it funny? You could not care less. How you took those words back, now I'm just a mess. I'm running away from escaping dreams of yesterday. Convincing me this cannot be. Trying to find another way. Yeah, I think my head always knew it, but I didn't tell my heart. Let go, I couldn't do it.